In the pre-dawn darkness of May 26, 1941, a tiny aircraft, barely larger than a modern car, trembled through freezing Atlantic air at just 90 miles per hour. Its fabric wings shuddered in the wind. Its single engine coughed and sputtered. Below, the most powerful warship ever built by Nazi Germany carved through black water like a cathedral of steel and death. The German sailors called the little plane a stringbag, British slang for a worthless shopping bag. They laughed at its canvas-covered frame, its laughably slow speed, its comically outdated design. It looked like something from the previous war, a relic that had no business sharing the sky with modern fighters. But inside that antiquated cockpit sat men who would change the course of the Second World War. What happened in the next 18 minutes shouldn't have been possible. The physics argued against it. The odds mocked it. Common sense rejected it. Yet somehow, this flying dinosaur, this airplane the Nazis dismissed as a joke, would land a killing blow against the pride of Hitler's Kriegsmarine. This is the story of the Fairey Swordfish. The story of obsolete technology defeating superior force. The story of courage so profound it bordered on madness. And most of all, this is the story of how one of history's most powerful battleships met its doom at the hands of a plane that should never have been their victory. We must first understand what we're dealing with, two machines so radically different they seem to belong to separate centuries. The Bismarck. Say the name slowly, and you can almost hear the weight of it. Launched in February 1939 from the Blohm & Voss shipyard in Hamburg, she was a Leviathan, 823 feet of welded steel plating, displacement tonnage of over 50,000 tons when fully loaded. Her main battery consisted of 8 15-inch guns that could hurl a 1-ton shell over 20 miles with devastating accuracy. Her armor belt measured 12.5 inches thick in places, virtually impenetrable to anything the Royal Navy could throw at her. She was beautiful, in the way that terrible things can be beautiful. Her sleek Atlantic bow cut through water with an almost predatory grace. Her superstructure rose in layers of gunmetal gray, bristling with anti-aircraft batteries, fire control systems, and the latest German radar technology. When fully crewed, 2,200 men served aboard her, a floating city of war. Adolf Hitler himself attended her commissioning in August 1940, standing on the rain-slicked deck with Admiral Erich Raeder, the head of the Kriegsmarine. For Hitler, Bismarck represented more than naval power. She was a symbol, proof that Germany could challenge Britain's centuries-old dominance of the seas. A steel fist aimed at the jugular of Britain's Atlantic lifeline. And she was not alone. Operating with the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, Bismarck was tasked with Operation Rheinübung, Rhine exercise. The mission was brutally simple: break into the North Atlantic and destroy the merchant convoys that kept Britain alive. Starve the island. Cut the supply lines. Force Churchill to sue for peace. Now, contrast this titan with her unlikely joke. Truly. Even British pilots affectionately called her the stringbag because she seemed held together by wire and prayers. First flown in 1934, she was already obsolete before the war even started, a biplane in an age of sleek monoplanes, a canvas-covered antique in a world of all-metal construction. Her maximum speed was 138 miles per hour. In level flight, with a torpedo slung beneath her belly, she slowed to about 90 miles per hour. Modern fighters could fly 3 times that fast. Her service ceiling, the maximum altitude she could reach, was barely 10,000 feet. She had no armor plating. No self-sealing fuel tanks. Her crew of 3 sat exposed to the elements in open cockpits, buffeted by wind and rain, navigating by compass and dead reckoning over featureless ocean. Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmond, who would fly one of these machines into history, once described the experience: you sit in the front, completely exposed, with nothing but a windscreen between you and eternity. The wind tears at your face even through the goggles. The engine throws oil back that sticks to everything. You can smell the ocean 1,000 feet below. You can taste fear. And you fly straight at ships that can throw up enough metal to darken the sky. The Swordfish carried a crew of 3, pilot, observer, and rear gunner. The observer handled navigation and bomb aiming. The rear gunner operated a single .303 Vickers machine gun, useful primarily for making the crew feel slightly less helpless. For armament, she could carry either bombs, depth charges, or a single 18-inch torpedo weighing over 1,600 pounds. That torpedo was the key. The Mk-12 aerial torpedo had a range of about 1,500 yards and traveled at roughly 40 knots. To launch it effectively, a Swordfish pilot had to fly low, dangerously low, sometimes less than 50 feet above the waves, and slow, approaching the target at a steady speed to ensure a clean drop. This meant flying straight. The Swordfish was supposed to be retired, replaced by more modern aircraft. But Britain was desperate. She was fighting alone against Nazi-occupied Europe. Her factories couldn't produce newer aircraft fast enough. So the old Stringbags kept flying, kept fighting, manned by crews who knew they were piloting death traps. Captain Stephen Roskill, the official historian of the Royal Navy in World War II, would later write, "The Swordfish was obsolete before the war began." That it survived to render such service is a tribute not to the aircraft itself, but to the almost superhuman courage of the men who flew it. In May 1941, the stage was set for an impossible confrontation. The most modern battleship in the world versus an obsolete biplane from the previous decade. 50,000 tons of armor and firepower versus canvas wings and a single torpedo. The pride of the Third Reich versus what the Germans themselves called that ridiculous flying thing. The smart money wasn't on the underdog. The smart money was on the battleship. May 18, the smart money was 1941. The Bismarck and Prinz Eugen slipped their moorings in Gotenhafen, German-occupied Poland, and began their death ride into history. In London, the Admiralty knew something was coming. Swedish intelligence had spotted the German task force moving through the Kattegat. Reconnaissance photos confirmed the worst fears Bismarck was making for the Atlantic. Every alarm in the British naval establishment began to ring. Admiral Sir John Tovey, Commander-in-Chief of the Home Fleet, understood the stakes immediately. If Bismarck reached the convoy routes, the slaughter would be catastrophic. Britain imported nearly everything: food, fuel, ammunition, raw materials. Those convoys were the nation's lifeline. A loose battleship in the Atlantic would be like a wolf in a sheep pen, free to kill until she ran out of ammunition or fuel. Tovey ordered virtually every available warship to intercept. The battleships HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Hood raced north. The battlecruiser HMS Repulse steamed from the Clyde. The brand-new aircraft carrier HMS Victorious, barely worked up and crewed by inexperienced pilots, rushed to join the hunt. Even the ancient battleship HMS Revenge was pulled from convoy duty. The Royal Navy was staking everything on one roll of the dice. May 23. In the Denmark Strait, the narrow passage between Iceland and Greenland, the heavy cruisers HMS Suffolk and HMS Norfolk picked up Bismarck on radar. The hunt was on. Through fog and ice, the British cruisers shadowed the German task force, transmitting position reports every few minutes. Bismarck's commander, Admiral Gunther Lütjens, knew he'd been spotted. But he pressed on. The mission demanded it. May 24, dawn broke cold and grey over the Denmark Strait. HMS Hood, the pride of the Royal Navy, the largest warship in the world, the symbol of British sea power, opened fire on Bismarck at a range of 25,000 yards. Prinz Eugen returned fire immediately. Bismarck's gun spoke 6 seconds later. The battle lasted 14 minutes. Hood's fifth salvo straddled Bismarck, shells landing just short and just over, the classic bracket that meant the next salvo would hit. In Hood's fire control station, officers smiled. They had the range. Victory was seconds away. They never fired that next salvo. At 6 a.m. exactly, Bismarck's fifth salvo struck home. One shell, possibly two, penetrated Hood's thin deck armor and detonated inside her aft magazines. What happened next defied description. Eyewitnesses aboard Prince of Wales reported a very bright red flame that shot upward through Hood's midships, followed by a catastrophic explosion that literally broke the great ship's back. Hood's stern rose into the air like a drowning man's hand reaching for help. Then she was gone, swallowed by the cold Atlantic in less than 3 minutes. Of Hood's crew of 1,418 men, exactly 3 survived. Lieutenant Esmond Knight, serving aboard Prince of Wales, later wrote, "One moment she was there, a great ship full of life and hope. The next moment, nothing. Just oil and debris spreading across the water." I remember thinking, that could have been us. That should have been us. Then I stopped thinking and started already damaged and with her brand new guns malfunctioning, broke off the engagement. Bismarck had won a stunning victory. But victory came with a price. One of Prince of Wales's shells had struck Bismarck's forward fuel tank, causing a steady leak and contaminating hundreds of tons of fuel oil. Admiral Lütjens faced a decision: press on with the mission on reduced fuel, or return to France for repairs. He chose to make for the French port of Saint-Nazaire. Prinz Eugen would continue the commerce raiding mission alone. Bismarck would withdraw. It was a sound decision, based on sound naval logic. It was also a death sentence, because every ship in the Royal Navy was now hunting Bismarck with a fury that transcended mere strategy. Hood had been more than a warship. She had been a symbol, a promise, a piece of Britain's soul. Her loss demanded blood vengeance. For the next 24 hours, the hunt continued. Bismarck's crew worked frantically to patch the fuel leak while evading British pursuers. Suffolk and Norfolk continued their radar shadow, staying just beyond gun range, transmitting position reports that kept the Royal Navy locked onto their quarry. Then, in the early morning hours of May 25, Bismarck vanished. Suffolk lost radar contact. Norfolk's operators stared at empty screens. Through a combination of tactical maneuvering and sheer luck, Bismarck had broken the tracker's hold and disappeared into the vastness of the Atlantic. Admiral Tovey faced catastrophe. Somewhere in millions of square miles of ocean, the most dangerous warship afloat was running free. She could turn back toward Germany. She could make for occupied France. She could even turn west and disappear into the fog banks off Newfoundland. Without contact, the British fleet was hunting shadows. For 31 hours, Bismarck demanded updates every hour. In Berlin, Hitler waited by his telephone. Across the Atlantic, terrified merchant ships scattered from their convoy routes, captains knowing that Bismarck could emerge from any fog bank, from any horizon. Then, on May 26 at 10:30 a.m., a Catalina flying boat of the RAF Coastal Command spotted an oil slick gleaming on the grey water, 690 miles west of Brest, France. Following the trail north, the pilot caught a glimpse of a massive grey silhouette cutting through moderate swells. One battleship bearing 240 degrees, 5 miles, course 150 degrees, speed 20 knots. Contact re-established. But there was a problem. A huge problem. Bismarck had almost reached the protective umbrella of Luftwaffe air cover operating from French bases. In another 8 hours, German fighters would be able to escort her into Saint-Nazaire. British capital ships, Tovey's battleships and carriers, were too far away to intercept before nightfall. Once darkness came, Bismarck could execute another disappearing act and slip into France. Admiral Tovey studied his charts with the cold certainty of a man watching a winning hand slip through his fingers. He had one chance. One desperate, nearly impossible chance. HMS Ark Royal, the fleet carrier operating with Force H from Gibraltar, was within range. Just barely. If her aircraft could launch immediately, if they could find Bismarck in deteriorating weather, if they could slow her down, even by a few knots, then Tovey's battleships might catch her before she reached safety. It was a long chain of IFS. Each link had to hold. One failure would collapse everything. At 2:50 p.m. on May 26, 1941, 15 Swordfish torpedo bombers launched from Ark Royal's pitching deck. The wind shrieked. Rain fell in grey sheets. Visibility was measured in hundreds of yards. The Swordfish climbed into clouds that buffeted them like toys. Their crews navigated by compass, by instinct, by prayer. They dove to attack through savage anti-aircraft fire. Their torpedoes ran straight and true. They had just attacked HMS Sheffield, a British cruiser shadowing Bismarck. Through a catastrophic failure of communication, no one had told the Swordfish crews that Sheffield had moved ahead to maintain contact. The attacking pilots saw a warship, assumed it was Bismarck, and pressed home their attack. By sheer luck and the malfunction of several magnetic torpedo exploders, Sheffield escaped undamaged. But precious time, precious fuel, and precious credibility had been wasted. The Swordfish crews returned to Ark Royal in shame, landing on a carrier deck that pitched 40 feet through each swell. Men vomited from exhaustion and airsickness. Ground crews refueled aircraft while seawater washed across the flight deck. Ordnance handlers loaded the last torpedoes in the ship's magazines, these with contact exploders instead of the unreliable magnetic detonators. At 7:10 p.m., as the sun dropped toward a cloud-dark horizon, 15 Swordfish launched again. A second chance. A last chance. This time, there would be no mistakes. Lieutenant Commander Tim Could, leading the striking force, brought his Swordfish down through the cloud base at 6,000 feet and immediately saw his target. 6 miles ahead, massive and dark against the grey sea, Bismarck plowed southward toward salvation. Even from this distance, she looked invincible. Her superstructure bristled with guns. Spray broke white against her bow. She was making 28 knots, every boiler pushed to maximum, her crew knowing that safety lay just hours ahead. Hood's observer, Sub-Lieutenant Peter Berger, scribbled a hasty contact report and transmitted it to Ark Royal. Then he put the pencil away and picked up his bomb sight. There would be no more reports. No more observations. From this moment forward, there was only two groups, approaching from different directions to split Bismarck's defensive fire. Even so, the mathematics of survival were brutal. Each swordfish had to fly straight and level for at least 45 seconds during the torpedo run, 45 seconds at less than 90 miles per hour, at less than 100 feet altitude, heading directly toward a ship that could throw up 14,000 rounds per minute of anti-aircraft fire. At 8:47 p.m., Bismarck's gunners opened fire. The sky became metallic chaos. Bismarck carried 14 105mm flak guns, 16 37mm automatic cannon, and 68 20mm guns. Every weapon that could bear on the attacking aircraft opened up simultaneously. Tracers arced upward in streams of lethal light. Heavy flak shells burst in black flowers. The 38cm main battery, the huge 15-inch guns designed to sink battleships, depressed to their lowest angle and fired into the water ahead of the aircraft, hoping to destroy the fragile biplanes with giant water spouts. The Swordfish flew through hell. Sub-Lieutenant Charlie Friend was in the second wave, watching the first aircraft go in. Decades later, he would recall, "I could see the whole ship firing. It wasn't individual guns, it was a solid mass of flame running the entire length of her. The tracers seemed to fill the air, so thick you felt you could walk on them. I kept thinking, there's no way through. There's no possible way through that. But the chaps ahead of us just kept going, steady as rocks, flying right into it. One swordfish took a direct hit from a 105mm shell and simply vanished, a flash, a spray of debris, gone. The crew never knew what killed them. One moment they existed, the next they were atoms scattered across the Atlantic. Sub-Lieutenant Dixon caught a stream of 37mm rounds through her port wing. Canvas shredded. Control wires snapped. The aircraft yawed violently to the left. Dixon fought the controls, somehow kept her level, somehow held the torpedo run. His observer, Lieutenant Hugh de Graaf Hunter, called the range in a voice gone flat and mechanical with terror-suppressed focus, 1,200 yards, 1,000 yards, 800. At 600 yards, Dixon released his torpedo and threw the Swordfish into a violent climbing turn, pulling every G the fragile airframe could tolerate. Fragments from a flak shell peppered the rear fuselage. The rear gunner, leading airman Albert Myland, felt something hot slice past his face and realized only later it had been a piece of shrapnel that missed his eye by less than an inch. They had survived. Barely. But had they hit anything? Aboard Bismarck, the scene was desperate calculation. Officers tracking the torpedo wakes shouted bearings and ranges. Captain Ernst Lindemann, commanding the battleship, barked helm orders, trying to comb the torpedo tracks, to turn the ship parallel to the oncoming weapon so they would pass harmlessly along her length. Bismarck answered her helm sluggishly, her 50,000-ton mass resisting rapid course changes. Most of the torpedoes missed. They ran beneath the ship or past astern or broached and ran crazy. The British crews had done everything humanly possible, flown through impossible fire, held impossibly steady, released at the textbook perfect moment, and still the ocean worked against them. The torpedoes conspired to fail, probability itself seemed weighted toward the battleship. Most of the torpedoes missed. 8:51 p.m. But not all. Sub-Lieutenant John Moffat released his torpedo from less than 1,000 yards, directly astern of Bismarck. The weapon ran shallow and true, its simple contact exploder armed and ready. It struck Bismarck on her port side, aft, just forward of her port propeller shaft. The explosion wasn't particularly dramatic. Compared to the massive detonations of heavy shells, the torpedo's 388-pound Torpex warhead produced a relatively modest blast. But location was everything. The shape-charge warhead focused its energy inward and upward, punching through Bismarck's relatively thin stern armor and wreaking havoc on her steering gear. The immediate damage was catastrophic. The explosion jammed Bismarck's twin rudders hard to port, locked in a 12-degree turn. Hydraulic lines ruptured. Mechanical linkages snapped. Electrical systems feeding the steering motors failed in cascading sequence. The damage control parties rushed aft, wading through flooded compartments, and confronted an insoluble problem. The steering machinery was buried beneath tons of twisted metal and freezing seawater, inaccessible and unrepairable. Captain Lindemann immediately ordered engineers to disconnect the rudders from the steering gear and center them manually. Teams worked frantically with cutting torches and sledgehammers, trying to free the jammed mechanism. Nothing worked. The rudders remained locked, forcing Bismarck into a slow, endless circle that led back toward her pursuers. Admiral Lutyens, watching the battleship trace her death spiral, understood immediately. He transmitted a final message to Naval Group West in Paris, ship unmaneuverable. We shall fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer. Back aboard Ark Royal, the returning Swordfish crews had no idea what they'd accomplished. They'd flown through hell. They'd dropped their torpedoes. They'd seen explosions alongside the battleship but couldn't confirm hits through the spray and smoke. Landing in full darkness on a bucking carrier deck, certain they'd failed. Sub-Lieutenant Moffat landed last, his Swordfish running on vapors, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the control column. Ground crews had to help him out of the cockpit. He stood on the spray-washed deck, numb and exhausted, and said to his observer, "We didn't do it. We put up a good show, but we didn't do it." He was wrong. Miles to the south, Bismarck turned in slow agony, her massive engines driving her forward at 28 knots but her jammed rudders dragging her in circles, unable to run, unable to maneuver, waiting for dawn and the arrival of the British battle fleet. Throughout the night, destroyers harassed her with torpedo attacks, keeping her crew at action stations, allowing no rest, no repairs. The North Atlantic weather worsened. 30-foot swells rolled across Bismarck's decks. Wind shrieked through her superstructure. Inside, 2,000 men checked their weapons, wrote letters they hoped someone might find, made peace with gods they'd forgotten in peacetime. They knew what morning would bring. 40:00, 52:00, aftermath, the iron price. Sound, heavy naval guns, the deep thunder of battleship combat. Dawn came slowly on May 27, 1941. The sky remained overcast, the sea rough and grey. At 8:43 a.m., lookouts aboard Bismarck spotted masts on the northern horizon. HMS Rodney and HMS King George V, Britain's most powerful battleships, were closing for the kill. What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. A necessary execution, a justified execution, but an execution nonetheless. At 8:47 a.m., Rodney opened fire from 25,000 yards. Her 16-inch gun spoke with the voice of thunder. King George V joined seconds later. Bismarck, still circling helplessly with her rudders jammed, returned fire with desperate accuracy. Her third salvo structure with a 15-inch shell that, by sheer luck, failed to detonate. But Bismarck couldn't maneuver. She couldn't dodge. She could only circle and endure, a wounded animal surrounded by wolves. The British battleships closed the range. Fired. Closed further. Fired again. From 25,000 yards, then 20,000, then 15,000. Rodney's 16-inch shells punched through Bismarck's armor like paper. King George V's 14-inch salvos hammered her superstructure into scrap. Heavy cruisers HMS Norfolk and HMS Dorsetshire closed from the flanks, adding their 8-inch batteries to the carnage. By 9:31 a.m., Bismarck was a floating wreck. Her forward turrets were silent, their crews dead. Her bridge was gone, smashed to splinters by repeated hits. Fires burned throughout her hull. Her superstructure looked like something chewed by a giant and spat out. She was still afloat, testament to German engineering, but no longer capable of fighting. Captain Benjamin Martinleague, gunnery officer aboard King George V, later wrote, "She could not fight back, but she would not sink. We continued firing not because we wanted to, but because we had to. Every minute she remained afloat was another minute she might escape, might somehow be salvaged. So we continued to pound her, feeling sick with what we were doing but unable to stop." At 10:15 a.m., Admiral Tovey ordered firing to cease. Bismarck was clearly finished, burning from end to end, listing heavily, her crew abandoning ship. Tovey's battleships were running low on fuel and ammunition. The job was done. But Bismarck would 3,000 yards and put 3 torpedoes into Bismarck's starboard side. She continued to float, listing further but stubbornly refusing to go under. German sailors were leaping into the oil-slicked water, swimming away from the dying ship. British sailors watched in awe and horror as the massive battleship simply would not die. Then, at 10:39 a.m., Bismarck suddenly rolled to port. For a moment she hung suspended, her massive keel exposed, barnacles visible on her bottom plating. Then she capsized completely and slid beneath the waves. Of Bismarck's crew of 2,200 men, only 115 survived. The rest went down with their ship or died in the freezing Atlantic water. Dorsetshire and the destroyer HMS Maori picked up survivors until a U-boat alarm forced them to abandon the rescue. Men still swimming in the water watched British ships steam away, leaving them to drown. Some shook their fists in fury. Some simply gave up and slipped beneath the surface. The German weather ship Sachsenwald and the U-boat U-74 later picked up 5 more survivors. That was all. 2,085 men died with Bismarck. Among them was ordinary seaman Alfred Hermann, age 18, who had lied about his age to join the Kriegsmarine. Among them was Chief Gunnery Officer Lieutenant Commander Adalbert Schneider, who had sunk HMS Hood 3 days earlier and now followed her to the bottom. Among them was Captain Ernst Lindemann, who chose to go down with his ship rather than face the shame of survival. Admiral Gunther Lutyens went down as well. His body was never recovered. His final message, "Long live the Führer," echoed with hollow irony through German naval headquarters. Hitler had sent Bismarck to her death for propaganda and pride. Now she was gone, along with 2,000 irreplaceable trained sailors and enough steel to build, was met with relief so profound it bordered on euphoria. Hood had been avenged. The Atlantic convoys were safe. Churchill addressed Parliament and praised the Royal Navy's determination, though he carefully avoided mentioning how close Bismarck had come to escaping. But in the quiet officers' clubs and naval bases, in the pubs where swordfish crews drank to dead friends, the real story circulated. A single torpedo. A lucky hit. A jammed rudder. 18 minutes of obsolete biplanes flown by suicidal brave men had changed everything. Aboard Ark Royal, when Sub-Lieutenant John Moffat learned that his torpedo had crippled Bismarck, he refused to celebrate. "Too many good men died," he said simply. "There's an ours. There's nothing to celebrate in that." He was right, of course. War offers no clean victories, no glory unstained by blood. But his torpedo had accomplished what the Royal Navy's greatest battleships could not. It had stopped the unstoppable. And it had done so from the cockpit of a plane the Germans had dismissed as a ridiculous in service until 1945, outlasting most aircraft that were designed to replace her. She served in every major theater of the war and was responsible for sinking more Axis shipping than any other Allied torpedo bomber. Sub-Lieutenant John Moffat, whose torpedo crippled the Bismarck, rarely spoke publicly about his role until late in life. He considered himself lucky to have survived, and always shared credit with his entire crew and squadron. Of Bismarck's 2,200 crew members, only 115 survived. The wreck was discovered in 1989 and lies approximately 400 miles west of Brest, France, at a depth of 15,720 feet. The last airworthy Swordfish flies in the Royal Navy historic flight, maintaining the memory of the crews who flew her into history. They were called obsolete. They proved otherwise.